Good evening, I'm Faye Kwan. Here are our top stories for tonight. Russia puts forward its own draft resolution on Gaza at the United Nations. And South Korea seals a $350 billion trade and security agreement with the US. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. Russia has put forward its own draft resolution on Gaza at the United Nations, setting up a direct challenge to a US proposal. Washington's plan calls for an international stabilization force and a 2-year transitional governance body, known as the Board of Peace, which President Donald Trump would chair. Moscow, however, says its version borrows elements from the US draft, but aims to give the Security Council a more balanced position that could support a durable pause to the fighting.
Russia's proposal asks the UN Secretary-General to outline options for a stabilization force, but leaves out the US plan for a transitional board of peace. The US, meanwhile, urged Council members to rally behind its resolution, warning that any move to create division during negotiations would harm Palestinians and threaten a fragile ceasefire. Israel and Hamas accepted the first phase of President Donald Trump's 20-point Gaza plan in October, following 2 years of war. The US has proposed a formation of a 20,000-strong international force for stabilizing Gaza, but Trump has ruled out sending American troops as part of that force. US officials have also reportedly held conversations with the UAE, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Indonesia about contributing soldiers or funding to this proposed international force.
The US and South Korea have unveiled a trade and security agreement that includes a $350 billion Korean investment package into the American economy and a cut in Washington's tariffs on South Korean exports. The deal was reached after months of negotiations between US President Donald Trump and Korean President Lee Jae-myung. The agreement will also see South Korea gain US approval to develop nuclear-powered submarines. In a joint announcement on Friday, both governments said South Korea would invest $150 billion into US shipbuilding sector, with another $200 billion for industrial projects, including artificial intelligence and nuclear energy. In return, the US will reduce tariffs on South Korean products, including autos, from 25% to 15%, easing pressure on key exporters such as Samsung and Hyundai. The White House also confirmed its support for South Korea to build nuclear-powered submarines and said it will work with Seoul on securing fuel supply options. The deal stems from a framework first announced in July after South Korea agreed to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in exchange for tariff relief. We'll be back with more after the break. Stay tuned.
Apa yang bakal berlaku membakar semangat. St. James's Park menanti City menghangatkan suasana. Dan kemenangan berbeza dirasakan dalam North London Derby. Inilah one for the fans. Rasai bahang Premier League secara langsung dan eksklusif di Astro.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back. The US has approved a $330 million sale of fighter jet parts to Taiwan, the first such military package since President Donald Trump's return to the White House. The Pentagon says the sale strengthens Taiwan's ability to respond to current and emerging threats.
The parts are intended to support the operational readiness of Taiwan's fleets. Although Washington maintains formal diplomatic ties with Beijing, it continues to keep unofficial relations with Taiwan and remains the island's main source of defense equipment. Under US law, Washington is also required to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself. Taiwan's presidential office thanked the United States for sustaining regular arms sales, saying the latest deal would strengthen the island's defense capabilities and overall resilience. It added that the sale would enhance Taiwan's ability to respond to China's continued gray zone activities.
Japan reaffirms that its position on Taiwan remains unchanged, following renewed friction with Beijing over recent remarks by Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara says peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait are vital for Japan's security and for wider global stability. He said Tokyo continued to support a peaceful, dialogue-driven approach to cross-strait issues, in line with the 1972 Japan-China Joint Communique, which recognizes Beijing's One China policy. China, which claims Taiwan as part of its territory, has not ruled out the use of force to bring the island under its control. Takaichi suggested last week that an armed attack on Taiwan could justify Japanese military support, prompting Beijing to summon Japan's ambassador and issue strong protests. China warned that it would respond decisively to any interference in its unification efforts. Kihara said Japan's envoy had clarified that the Prime Minister's comments and restated Tokyo's long-standing stance, adding that Japan rejected Beijing's criticism. He also said Tokyo had urged China to act responsibly after a Chinese diplomat in Japan allegedly issued a violent threat against Takaichi. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has called on the United Nations to take action against the US and Israel over strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. He says President Donald Trump and senior US officials bear criminal responsibility, pointing to Trump's recent claim that he directed Israel's initial strike on June 13th. In a letter to the UN Secretary-General and the Security Council, Araghchi demanded both countries be held accountable and pay reparations for the damage caused. Trump said on November 6 that he had been very much in charge of Israel's strikes on Iran. Araghchi argued this demonstrated direct US control throughout the 12-day air campaign. He said the evidence strengthened claims of war crimes by those who planned or supported the attacks, including Israeli officials. Iranian state media reported more than 900 deaths from the strikes, including Iranian military personnel. In other news, Switzerland says it is close to a trade deal that could cut a hefty US tariff on Swiss goods, following talks in Washington. Its economy minister told reporters that the two sides have now cleared all understanding issues after a meeting with US Trade Representative Jameson Greer. Both countries will share more once the final details are settled.
If approved by President Donald Trump, the deal would bring tariffs down from the current 39% to 15%. US officials said Switzerland has outlined a plan to narrow its trade surplus with the United States, which has topped $55 billion this year. They also point to fresh US investments by Swiss pharmaceutical firms, including Roche, as helping move the talks forward. Early this week, Trump said he was working on something to help Switzerland, though he has not yet set a final number. A drop from 39% to 15% would be a major boost for Swiss exporters, especially in machinery, watchmaking, and precision instruments, where the US is a key market.
Meeting between US President Donald Trump and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a close ally of the White House, has seen Budapest securing a one-year exemption from sanctions on Russian oil and gas. Brussels-based geopolitical analyst Boton Feledy highlights the tightrope Hungary continues to walk, balancing its reliance on Russian energy while maintaining favor in Washington ahead of national elections next spring.
The interest of the Hungarian Prime Minister in maintaining the access to Russian oil is important because several government-aligned entities have interest in the oil company's profit. So it has a very concrete outcome for Fidesz in the upcoming election year, whether they have these surpluses, both potentially in state budget and in government-aligned organizations. Having that said, Donald Trump is also keen on trying to make a deal with Russia, and Orban wants to be instrumental in that. That's why we had the discussions around the Budapest meeting of the two sides, Russia and the United States. So this tightrope is actually working out on the diplomatic level, At the same time, we don't really see the payoffs on the Hungarian citizens' side, because all the neighboring countries, like the Austrians or a bit further the Czech Republic, could come off the Russian imports rather without a price surge, having the same prices as Hungary has currently on Russian oil. They have no problems at the petrol stations, and that means that it is feasible, but Hungary has not yet begun to shift away from Russian resources in the last 3 years since it was getting impatient.
Speaking on the possibility of a Trump-Putin meeting in Budapest, Boton said such a summit would serve more as a political opportunity for the Kremlin than a diplomatic breakthrough.
Hungary cannot be neutral in any respect. On the one hand, it is a NATO member state and an EU member state, the ally of the United States, therefore ally of the measures that are being taken by NATO members. On the other hand, Orbán himself and his government policy is also not neutral when it comes to the war. It is clear that Hungary does run a much more Russia-friendly stance among the EU member states, most Russia-friendly. Vladimir Putin has just endorsed Orbán openly at a public event in Russia in the last months. So that means that it is EU head of government running for re-election being endorsed by Vladimir Putin. So if this meeting is taking place in Budapest, that is actually a diplomatic and a political win for Vladimir Putin to come to NATO and the EU member states to be able to fly in. Hungary is in the process of resigning from the International Criminal Court Treaty, therefore already saying that they would not arrest Vladimir Putin despite it's still running international legal obligations. So for Putin, is this the biggest win? And it is just a very ephemeral win for and victory for Viktor Orbán in his election campaign, dressed up by the government-friendly media for election purposes.
This week on Wu Says, we turn our focus to COP30. Professor Emeritus Dr. Wu Wing Tai and Melissa Idris unpack what's at stake this year with Trump's presidency entering its first year. Here's a segment from the conversation.
Well, he not only has called it a hoax, he has backed it up with actions. Like, for example, he has stopped the funding of the development of alternative energy sources. And he, like, for example, there was a plan to make green EVs in America. He's taken away the tax credit for those companies that were going to do it. And the other thing he has done is he has doubled down on the sale of American gas to the rest of the world. If you look at the trade treaty that Malaysia signed when he was here, we agreed to buy more U.S. gas. We signed to import more U.S. gas. And if you look at many of the trade treaties, that's what he has made it a condition of. And he has also looking actively into granting permits to drill in different parts of the United States. That is the other action. Right. And of course, USAID had programs to help the poorer countries to decarbonize their economies, and all those plans have been removed from USAID. In fact, USAID itself has ceased to exist.
Catch the full conversation on AWANI International and across our social media platforms.
The report wraps up AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Faye Kwan. Thank you for watching and good night.